Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining today's Empowering and Transforming Our Communities and Innovation and Entrepreneurship Journey. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the Zoom chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you do require technical assistance, please send a chat to all panelists. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Vince Quarles, Deputy Director, Office of Minority Programs, Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Roy. And just let me start by welcome all of you that's out in virtual land. Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. I'm excited about today's event. When I think of the title, Empowering and Transforming, we truly have two separate presentations that will speak to young minds and young students out there, as well as partnership opportunities. And so, again, I want to welcome you to today's event. And I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Ann Augustin, the Acting Director for our office, as well as our Principal Deputy. She's been with the Department of Energy for quite a while in many different roles. And we want to thank her for her support and allowing the opportunity to do events like these. With that, Ann, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Vince. A warm welcome to everyone that's joining us virtually, and I want to thank you for being part of this special event, which, as Vince mentioned, is focused on empowering and transforming our communities. As many of you know, the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity has a broad portfolio ranging from enforcing internal and external civil rights laws, fostering a diverse and inclusive work environment, developing the energy workforce of the future, ensuring that minorities can participate fully in the energy sector, including bolstering our minority businesses, minority communities, and supporting our minority educational institutions. Our focus for this session includes the many educational opportunity institutions and the students that we work with to ensure equitable access to opportunities. I want to thank our minority education team and Vince Quarles for having the foresight to identify non-traditional resources for our stakeholders and to expand the range of speakers we will continue to see throughout this year, and will hopefully open many doors, especially for our minority students. I also want to thank the audience for joining us, and as we continue down this venture of working in a virtual environment, we are honored that so many of you are taking advantage of our presentations, none of which would have been possible without Christy Jackowitz and Vince Quarles. So kudos to both of you and for the hardworking team members that are behind the scenes every day, making sure we are striving for success. I'm looking forward to hearing about all of the opportunities that ORISE and Microsoft will be presenting today. But at this point, I'm going to turn it back to our Deputy Director of Minority Programs, Vince Quarles. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the presentation today.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Ann. And again, welcome everyone. And without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing this Christy Jackowitz. Go ahead, Christy.
Thank you, Vince. First, I definitely want to thank my staff. I don't know that I thank them enough, but Chester Scott and Jamie Clanton, who is a contractor but supports the work that we've been doing. I really want to thank you for your dedication and commitment to every vision and idea that I've come up with, and Vince and Ann for supporting that. It's just been really awesome to have that type of support. For today, Desmond Stubbs, directors of the STEM Initiatives and Diversity at the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education, will be coming to us today, and also Damon House, who is the Senior Manager of Health Services at Microsoft. So Desmond, if you would get started, we're looking forward to the information you'll share.
Yeah, well, thank you, Christy, and let me thank the audience. I know this week has been really tough and challenging across the country, given our continuous struggles with COVID and the recent snow event that's happened across 70% of our country. So thank you all for taking the time out and sacrificing and being here. Hopefully my colleague Damon House from Microsoft and myself can deliver some much needed relief in terms of opportunities for you as a student, as a faculty, and as a small business. Just a little about me before we get into my presentation. I actually started my collegiate career at Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, as a chemistry student. I then graduated and went on to Georgia Tech, where I received my PhD in biochemistry. The first actual position I took as a professional was at Oak Ridge National Lab in a newly created office called the Oak Ridge Center for Advanced Studies. So it was a sort of a public policy office, unique only to ORNL at the time. And it was sort of operated by a number of university partners, the laboratory itself, Battelle Memorial Institute, and ORAU, where I now sit, Oak Ridge Associate University. So I say that story to say that there are many pathways to get where you want to go. I moved my career away from the bench into public policy, into the space where we're trying to be creative around creating pathways for students like yourself, for small businesses like yourself to engage the federal enterprise, particularly the federal research enterprise, where we believe there's tons of opportunities, but at the interface of those opportunities is where we need to be creative in creating the access for groups like you. So let me thank the students who are here in particular. I wanted to say a special shout out to all the students online. Bear with me and Damon. I promise we're not boring guys. We talk a lot. This is going to be exciting and engaging. I promise you that. And at the end of the day, maybe the opportunities may not be exact fit, but what I want you to get from this is the context around how do you engage, how do you seek out, sort of your own career opportunities within this large Department of Energy enterprise. How do you self-advocate? How do you reach out to scientists, faculty, and others to help advance your own personal goals? Wherever, if it terminates into a graduate degree, if it terminates at the bachelor's and you're moving on to industry, I hope you see a pathway how to enhance that journey that you're taking. So let's start with a short video about ORISE. We've been around for 70 years, created, like many of our structures during the Manhattan Project, to support the workforce primarily, and we still do that to this day. We do other things you're going to learn about in the video, but what I want you to get from here is sort of the vastness of the opportunities that we provide around science and technology. So can we please play the video, please?
The Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education is a U.S. Department of Energy asset that supports DOE and its national laboratory system, along with other strategic partners. ORISE provides 5 distinct types of support to the DOE mission, but many people have misconceptions about what ORISE actually does.
Some people might think that
workforce development is basically just sitting in a classroom and listening to lectures all day.
But really, I spend most of my days at a national laboratory.
when I get hands-on experience.
To help me join the next generation of scientists.
People might assume that we just organize and lead large-scale meetings, but it is through these meetings that we connect the academic world to the Department of Energy.
You might think that we spend our days just teaching classes on how to deal with radiation exposure. We also maintain a 24/7 medical advice and consultation and health physics response capabilities. REACT's professionals stand ready to deploy within hours of notification. Our team also manages the only CLIA-certified, federally funded biodosimetry laboratory in the United States and travels the globe providing educational courses to foreign and domestic healthcare professionals addressing the evaluation and treatment of radiation injuries and illnesses.
People think we spend most of our days sampling streams and fields, but we do so much more. Our teams travel the world characterizing radioactive contaminated sites such as ships, warehouses, and nuclear weapons facilities, and verifying that those sites are safe once cleanup activities have been completed.
Some people might think we're all doctors scanning old files and waiting for a health crisis to arise. But really, we're hard at work protecting the health and safety of the federal contractor workforce through broad scope epidemiology, beryllium testing, and radiation exposure data collection.
Still wondering what ORISE has to offer?
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I always like talking about where we are, where we've been, and why we exist. So this is the city of Oak Ridge. The places shaded in purple are the DOE facilities. We're all one big happy family in this little sort of small plot of land here that we share and work in. We're about 20 miles west of Knoxville, and many of us sort of reside in Knoxville. But it's a very high concentration of very smart and curious people, I like to say. Next slide, please. So Oak Ridge, before it was named Oak Ridge officially, was called the Secret City. It had no name. And you would, driving through the city, you would see signs like this. This was during the Manhattan Project. So you're thinking early 1940s, where folks were working shoulder to shoulder, not knowing the project of the other person. So it was a very interesting place in our country's history. Next slide, please. I like this slide because, and this is from the DOE archives, if you want to look it up. Everyone contributed. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, actually had an executive order in 1941. If you look at the last line in this sentence, it says, "There shall be no discrimination in employment of workers in defense, industries, or government because of race, creed, color, or national origin." Think about that, folks. Just take 1 second, think about it. This was 1941. And if you look at the pictures, you see black men shoulder to shoulder with white men. And the first picture at the upper left are guys waiting for their payment. And so you can see our African-American brother looking over the shoulder, just make sure to check that, the payments were equal. And this was all the guys just coming together for the good of the country, big project, where all of those social ills needed to be placed aside. Seems like we're almost there at that time again in our history. The picture to your upper right, the Calitron girls. So those are actually the early forms of mass spectroscopy. These were young ladies straight out of high school. And they were charged with monitoring the dials and the meters for those mass spectrometers. And initially, it's a funny story. They had master's students and PhD students working on those, but those guys got a little too curious. And so they would either turn the dial and offset and put everything out of phase with where it needed to be. And so they just trained up these young ladies and put them to work, and they just followed directions really well, fellas, and got the job done. So they were actually separating uranium isotopes using mass spectroscopy. So next slide, please. This is one of my heroes. So DOE, we have a Hidden Figures story to tell as well, NASA. So this is one of our heroes. This is Dr. J. Ernest Wilkins, Jr., a brilliant man, attended the University of Chicago at the age of 13. In fact, they used to call him the Negro genius. He was a genius, he was a mathematician. He got his PhD at 19 years old. He worked on things like modeling gas diffusion and radiation diffusion. The story here about Dr. Wilkins is that he began his career at the metallurgical lab. We call it the Met Lab. It's now Argonne's National Lab there in Chicago. And when the work was moved from the Met Lab to Tennessee, because of Jim Crow laws, he was not allowed to move with the work. They would not have Negro scientists at the time. And so he actually sent letters where the scientists at the lab were still engaging him in Chicago to help with some of the modeling of those diffusion dispersal models. And so Dr. Wilkins persevered, and he ended up at Tuskegee. And actually, many of the African-American scientists at the time ended up at HBCU as a fun fact. Because of the limitations of employment at the larger universities at the time. But I like these stories because the work continues. Dr. Wilkins didn't give up. So if you young people online and you think there are barriers, follow, Dr. Wilkins as he, persevered through those and continue to work on the work. Next slide, please. And if you have time for, again, the young people, students, and some of our graybeards on the line as well, you can look up some of these other heroes. These are also folks who worked on different aspects of the Manhattan Project. Dr. Leona Marshall-Libby is a physicist. She's a brilliant physicist. She actually was part of the design of the first nuclear reactor. So there's lots of fun facts here. Many of these folks ended up at HBCUs, from Clark Atlanta to North Carolina A&T. So this history is not just the history of DOE, but it's the history of people of color. And that's sort of what I want to infer as you start to think about, why is this guy talking about history? It's important. Next slide, please. So let's get back on track. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of our workforce development programs, from internships, fellowships, anything involving research experiences. So these are all learning experiences where we bring you in for a set period of time. We compensate you to defer your cost of being in Oak Ridge or being at one of the other DOE laboratories. We do work for all 17 national labs, but we're in Oak Ridge. So ORNL is our bestest buddies. We were actually founded by two ORNL scientists in our early beginnings. So I will walk you through some examples of some of these opportunities. And again, we have over 800 opportunities on our application support site. So, whenever you want to engage, you can find me out or some of our program managers to learn more in terms of details about these opportunities. Next slide, please. So just, by way of numbers, we like showing these slides. In a typical year, we usually do over 10,000 participants. These are folks sort of entering any of our 800 odd programs. Because of COVID, we're down to 8,000, which is pretty good. Lots of mixed models where it's virtual and some in-person models for the more advanced students doing graduate type work. See, we have 30% participation by our minority serving institutions. That table to the right tells you how these participants are distributed. Lots of our programs are targeting sort of that terminal end where we have over almost 1,500 postdocs involved in our program. We focus a lot on folks who are working on bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. That's the bulk of our participants. We also have K through 12 programs. So we try to cover the entire pipeline by providing these learning experiences. Next slide, please. So ORISE serves the Department of Energy first because we are a Department of Energy entity, but we also provide support for over 20 other federal agencies in some capacity. And typically it's a lot around workforce development. Next slide, please. I mentioned ORNL. They're just less than 5 miles away from where we are located. So we do a lot of work with the largest of the basic science labs within the DOE enterprise, and also the home of the world's most powerful computer, Summit. And so we're proud to be partners with ORNL. Next slide. So here's sort of some examples of some of our programs that I mentioned earlier. The ones in red are programs I will cover sort of examples of what these experiences are like, what's the eligibility, and maybe feature a few folks who've been through these experiences. Next slide. Oh, I like this slide. So this is my buddy Kevin Womack, who's now a PhD candidate at Columbia University in computer science. He spent the summer at ORNL in the GEM program. And that program focuses on bringing more minority science and engineers into graduate school and providing sort of summer experiences and supporting those summer experiences. Kevin here has a big smile on his face. Can anybody guess why? He's a graduate of Morehouse College, 2019. I'll give you a hint. Something very special happened at Morehouse College to that graduating class in 2019. A fellow by the name of Robert Smith, a billionaire, was the featured speaker, and he waved his billion-dollar arms and he erased all of the student debt. So Kevin told me his debt was in the six figures, and over the course of a 1-hour speech, he was debt-free. So I would be smiling too if that happened to me. Don't we all? So the GEM program is about a 10-week program, usually over the summer. Typically, graduate students would be sort of returning each summer to complete. We try to map the research projects with that of the research that's being done at the graduate level. We focus, it's not just computer science. We have chemistry students, we have engineers. So it's a pretty broad-based sort of science and technology approach of enriching the graduate experience and really trying to retain good people, particularly minority students, in the graduate pipeline. So next slide. So the other interesting thing about Kevin, he participated in a Google experience where he did Google internships and we wanted to see, were there any differentiation between the Google experience or industry experience than the sort of DOE research experience? So I asked Kevin if he could sort of like give me the pros and cons of each. And basically, other than the swag and the pay that Google would offer, Kevin was really serious about advancing his career and obtaining a graduate degree. And he saw that, and no offense to my colleague, he saw that those opportunities were promoted more in the DOE laboratory system than they were sort of in industry. And that makes sense. And there's no knock on Google. It's Google's looking for engineers to do work now. And ORNL and other large laboratories are looking to grow that scientific workforce for the future. So next slide, please. This is another good program, Mickey Leland Energy Fellowship. I like these programs for very specific reasons because I try to sort of relate these programs to the sort of social significance. So Mickey Leland was a congressman. He died in 1989 in a plane crash over Ethiopia. He was a very strong and ferocious advocate for food safety and addressing hunger and creating hunger programs not only here in the United States but also abroad. Congressman Leland represented Houston. It was very strong on getting students involved and sort of understanding how their life, their journey, their matriculation through college can really have a social impact on the world. And so this and other things were named after him and his legacy. And this is one of my favorite programs. It brings students in from across the country. It really tries to target students at MSIs for a 10-week experience. There's some travel involved. We're not in COVID. And those are the eligibility is there. And it typically brings in, over 100 students. So it's a really good program. It's competitive, but the selection rate is pretty good. So that's one of the programs I hope you can consider. Next slide, please. We have programs for faculty. So we have the HBCU MEI faculty program. It's a summer research experience where we create a collaborative relationship between a laboratory staff person and an HBCU faculty member. We encourage that, if you're interested in this, that, go through the website, look at the laboratory research priorities first, and then seek out, a PI at the lab that you think would be a good match for where you're trying to go with your research and how you can engage some of your students in the research itself. So this is another 10-week program, just competitive pay. If you look at that last bullet there, it's competitive pay. But what I really like about this is the opportunity, if you're at an MSI, to really grow your research and grow your research capacity because of all of the access to instrumentation, all of the access to postdocs that are at the labs. You can really sort of, accelerate what you want to do in terms of advancing your projects, and you could dream bigger than sort of the walls of your university. So I really encourage this. This leads to lots of publication. I particularly encourage faculty, early career faculty, to look into this. We try to create metrics around publishing, co-PIs on grant opportunities and other opportunities. So just being in that DOE research ecosystem, it has its advantages. It helps brand your work on campus, and there's lots of folks who sort of repeat their participation year by year. But once you're in the door and you create those relationships, it's a good chance that that relationship continues beyond sort of that project that you initially came in under. So next slide, please. So just sort of a typical sort of scaffold of a program. Usually it's about 10 weeks or less. We cover sort of all of the academic ages that's represented there. We even have post-bachelor's programs and post-master's programs, which are unique. And those programs are more like employment. You work on projects, but they're short-lived. So you can only enter that program for up to 2 years. Then you're going to have to decide about going back to graduate school or getting into industry. So it's designed as one of those buckets to sort of capture folks in the pipeline who maybe burnt out after 4 or 5 years of a STEM degree and looking to make a little money but still stay attached to the profession. So we've created sort of those programs to capture those folks who are looking to take that gap break but not lose momentum. Next slide, please. So we have some tips. We do workforce development, particularly with students. So we've learned things over the years. We do a lot of research around this. We always tell students to, first of all, learn about, the facility. If it's a laboratory you're interested in, go to the website, read about the research areas, have as much knowledge so you're aware that you're an informed consumer and you're not just going where you think people will accept you. Remember that you're very talented, have a lot of confidence in yourself, and really seek out opportunities that don't just match you and where you are now, but match you for where you want to be. And so if you know where's your terminal endpoint, whether it's a degree or a career, try to really match that opportunity with that and align those things so that, the experience you have are not out of phase. Many times we look at students' resumes and we'll see a 4.0 student who have sort of all of these disparate experiences everywhere, and you're really not telling a story of, what you want, where your passions lie, or who you are. Sort of your resume and then the person who shows up is a mismatch. You always want to be aware that you have some sense of who you are as a scientist or a professional, what you want to be, and only stay within that sort of that line of thought or thinking or journey, because it really helps when you're looking for, that opportunity, that golden opportunity, that when someone like me, an evaluator, looking at your resume, looking at your experiences and asking you questions, there's a coherent story to be told, right? And it's very much related to who you actually are, not who you might be pretending to be. That's a whole other story we will talk about. Next slide, please. So this is our applicant system, Zintellect. So it's intellect with a Z in the front. And you can see the website. So if you're online now and you're a student, go ahead, pop it up. And while I'm talking, you can put in your profile. There's over 800 opportunities on Zintellect. So wherever you are within STEM, Zintellect will find you. So I encourage everyone to go to the website, even if you're a faculty, go to the website, look at these opportunities. We have opportunities for folks within their career. We have mid-career opportunities in there. So, seek it out and at least get your profile on there. And we have a tab for mentors within the DOE enterprise who actually go in there and look at resumes and look at candidates. And instead of sort of you pushing things out, they can pull you in just by, being attached to the Zintellect system. Next slide. Let's see if I'm good on time. Yep. All right, so I mentioned some of this earlier, so we don't have to go over this. I talked about sort of matching experience, discipline, and really mapping out, your career pathway. And I always challenge students and even faculty. Lots of faculty like to use the shotgun method and just scatter pellets at every funding opportunity. And sometimes you just focus in on something that's very much aligned with your passion, with your resources at your school, with the type of students you can bring into that realm. Tells a better story for funders. And, I've been in that position as a funder, and I always look for faculty who have sort of a demonstrated track record where at zero funding, there's some energy, there's some programming, there's a poster session, there's something going on with zero funding versus having some large pot of funding to actually get things started. So nobody likes to start at ground zero. And there are resources everywhere to just, create some momentum that people can attach to. Folks like to attach to things in motion, sort of like kinetic energy thing, right? And kinetic energy requires work. And so folks like to attach themselves to things that are moving and has some momentum. So even as a student, as a small business, as a faculty member, create some momentum on your own. And that will attract funders. That's one of the lessons learned. Next slide, please. I think we sort of mentioned this. We go to the next slide. Mentioned about reaching out. This is so critical. Creating relationships, even if there's not an opportunity that fits you, even if you applied for an opportunity, you didn't get it, it doesn't stop you from reaching out and creating a relationship. Right? There are many programs that are featured in this slide deck that you will not be the most competitive candidate for. It doesn't stop you from creating your own program. I've seen it over my 15 years within the DOE enterprise of PIs at the lab creating their own relationships and finding funding and bringing in HBCU students or HBCU faculty. It happens, but that doesn't happen on its own, right? Again, it's sort of that thing. You have to reach out. You have to do your due diligence. The labs are, like a lab like ORNL is sort of an open door lab. If you apply early enough and you're a citizen, you can come in and visit. You can meet with groups. All of those things are possible. So, you'll have to self-advocate to really be in the position, to have these opportunities. Next slide. We could go to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah, let's talk a little about this. I call it the learn and earn model, similar to what happens with folks who are career changers. The Department of Labor years ago had a number of large grants around, folks moving from, the old manufacturing industries into sort of this new additive manufacturing world, and they would provide some learning modules through community colleges. And so it was called Learn and Earn. And I kind of like that because I think our programs are like that. These are learning experiences that allow you to actually, have a stipend, have an experience with other colleagues, and learn a new skill. So in that context, Christie's office called the Office of Economic Impact. I'm all for folks sort of retooling themselves, getting smarter about industry, smarter about things, and actually having an economic impact. So next slide. I'm a big proponent of high quality mentoring. We all know that. Everybody online know that this is important. But mentoring doesn't happen again, on its own. It's just not. It doesn't happen naturally. As a student, you have to find the right mentor for you. Meaning that what you want to be mentored on, right? There's various types of mentoring. There's sort of that socializing mentoring. There's sort of that networking mentoring. There's sort of, career mentoring. you have to decide. There's not just one mentor that embodies everything you need. So, and even if you're a small business, we at ORAU, we actually mentor small business around federal contracting. We are a prime contractor. And so there's different types of mentoring that a small business needs. Maybe you want help with, what your federal contracting infrastructure should look like. What does it mean to write a competitive proposal? Who do we need to partner with to target, certain work? So there's different type of mentoring across the spectrum, but, like anything else, I always said use STEM to do STEM. Like anything else, you have to think strategically. These things are known, but a lot of people don't put effort, days, times, hours into really thinking through, where are my deficiencies? What am I proficient at? Where do I need mentoring? And what is mentoring versus where do I need to network better? And just really differentiate those things and be, sort of more strategic and think more granular about the type of interactions and not from the sense of what you can gain from other people, but what can you provide to a larger business? What can you give the DOE that they do not have? And many of us who are seeking opportunities don't think in those terms. You have a lot to offer. There's a lot of assets represented and resources represented on this call. And if you were to, approach the position of, you need me because I have access to this. And Damon and I, you'll hear Damon talk later, we've explored that model and we've been getting a lot of traction. Next slide. So, ORAU, we formed a number of strategic partnerships. I lead a group of 25 MSIs called the MSI Research Council. We work at that research interface between the university research system and national labs and other federal partners. So we have a research agenda. It's community-based. So we're looking at how do you address sort of that portfolio of social injustices through research. We talk about, health disparities, climate change, climate justice, environmental justice, and all of those sort of disparities and gaps that exist in our society. But how are the universities addressing those? Who's working on that work? How can we carve out a research agenda where we can really leverage the capacity again of the laboratories to really address some issues that are, that have been persistent in our society for a long time, but, with the changes being made in our country are becoming, more visible. We also have mentor protege program opportunities, and I'm going to touch briefly on the Minority Health Information Exchange, but I think Damon's going to speak to that more than I will. Next slide. Yeah, so this just, again, speaks to the types of partnerships we're trying to develop that really advance science, but advance sort of community-based science. How do we take science back to the grassroots? What I like about schools like, the school I went to, Morris Brown College, is, we were created by the community to serve the community, right? We were created to create the police officers, the lawyers, doctors, the businessmen, the nurses, and many of our schools have sort of, drifted away from that purpose. And that has a lot to do with our society change. We're more integrated than we used to be. The places where our schools live have become very, very urbanized. And if you go to Atlanta, where my campus is, Morris Brown College, right across the street is one of the newest football stadiums, right? So it's the landscape has changed, but there's still community needs that can be addressed through the work of these universities. So we try to harness those assets and resources and really come up with a strategy of how do we create research agendas that fit that and address the national priorities, which is the mission of the DOE laboratories. Next slide. This is a map of our partnering institutions. Next slide. I'll talk briefly about this. We could go through these slides as we start to move with time. We had our first ever postdoc appointment Dr. Samantha Thompson. She came to us from Southern University in Baton Rouge. She was a policy analyst, and we challenged her to take a look at some of our programs and really do a deep dive into what are the barriers for having sort of underrepresented people engage more with the programs, right? So she created a number of white papers where she just, looked across the spectrum of programs, look at the participation rates, took in the data, and really tried to, create some talking points about, I think she even hosted a few students, to get a sort of consensus on, what were their challenges. And she conducted a number of interviews and surveys and sort of, just a very clinical approach to breaking down the programs and really trying to find how can we enrich these programs to attract more minorities to them. Next slide. She also did sort of a STEM capacity dashboard where we look at, who are the greatest producers in these STEM areas in terms of degrees. And it's not to target those schools, it's to see, sort of cross map, these numbers with where our programs are. So where are we addressing sort of the fall off? If you look at the next slide, yeah, you can see, in chemistry, some schools are producing 3-4 graduates. And these degrees, the physical sciences are the sort of, particularly within DOE, these are the highly sought after disciplines. So how can we create sort of those bridge programs to really help increase these numbers? Next slide. And these are more numbers. Again, physics, related to material science. A lot of our labs are built on, physical sciences. So these are the degrees and disciplines that are best match for our opportunities. So we're very concerned about the numbers and however we can create these experiences to encourage students to stay in those disciplines and not, move on to a different discipline. However, we could create sort of experiences that are feel-good experiences being in there and feeling like a physicist or feeling like a material scientist. We're looking to sort of impact these programs. Next slide. So here's a list of some white papers. I won't go through all of those. So Samantha was pretty productive during her stay. She had a 1-year appointment. And in the future, we're looking to bring on more folks like her from the HBCUs who have PhDs into our system to really help inform, from someone that's closest to, some of the issues associated with leaving a non-diverse environment for a very diverse environment within our DOE systems. Next slide. So I'll touch on this briefly. I mentioned that my good friend Damon House will talk more about this. So I mentioned earlier that, realizing the resource that you bring to the table is a lot more important than realizing the assets that you can access when you're talking to, federal agencies and other funders. So we explored this with some of our nursing schools within the MSI community, Southern Nursing School, some of our HBCU medical school, who actually have historical patient data. So that's something that the larger schools, when you're talking about a Vanderbilt Medical School, some of these really large medical schools, they have access to patient data, but do they have 100-year plus patient data like a Meharry that's been around for over 150 years? Do they have data where nurses go to places, hard to reach places in the community, in the Gulf Coast, like Southern does with their outreach efforts, where they're taking in data? That's a real asset with real value to it. And then once you have that type of resource, who are the partners that can realize that data into something that's useful where people can gain knowledge? So that comes through the power of partnership with a company like mine, ORAU, and Microsoft, that can convert and digitize that data into an electronic file that can be used and collected, and then curated into a repository. So we've been thinking about creating a health information exchange where we have a repository platform in the cloud, Azure, Microsoft, where students can be a part of the architecture as well as part of sort of that entry point to data science, looking at data that's most relative to their lives, patients' data, patient that look like them. And it's called Health Information Exchange because we're looking to bring in those social vulnerability data. So EPA has data on exposure for different zip codes. So if I have Southern data, right, they're in Baton Rouge. If I got the Baton Rouge zip code and the amount of exposure that people are subject to each year in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I can see if there are some sort of correlation between different type of respiratory illnesses, particularly among African Americans in that region, with sort of the ebbs and flows of exposure to things like sulfur dioxide from all of the industry, fossil fuel industry that's on the Gulf Coast. And then we can start talking about environmental justice and climate change and the influence of that. And so it's an exciting start to something that's unique to this environment. There's lots of collections of repositories being done by NIH. That's the All of Us study. I mean, folks on the line are probably familiar with other efforts, but there's no efforts that's focused on African American population and looking at their unique needs, their unique disposition in different areas of the country where they're most vulnerable. So I'm excited about this project. Next slide. So I talked a little about that. I'm not going to get too much into the architecture, but we want to make this available. Damon and I, we've been talking over a year about, creating a valued structure for HBCUs in particular, where they have first bid on an infrastructure, cloud-based infrastructure, where they can do research in the cloud without sort of having brick and mortar. And so we've been thinking through this model. We've advanced it past the white paper. We've been having a few ideation sessions with Microsoft experts. There's a lot of interest from NASA to engage and other agencies. And as we continue to develop, this model, if anybody's out there that's interested in engaging or learning more, please reach out. Next slide. I'm almost to the end. All right. So we also have Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence for Social Impact. Again, it's how do we engage students in data science with a pathway that brings them to the table. So we know data science on our campuses live in the STEM disciplines, but more importantly, it lives within computer science. So we want to move it out of computer science. We want it to be sort of cross-disciplinary. So we want folks in social studies and history, all of these folks that deal with data every day, to have some level of data science literacy. And how do you do that? Well, you engage them around sort of, these social issues that are again, they've been persistent, but, now there's lots of visibility around these issues. So why don't engage the students and the business community around issues where they're, they bring in a ton of knowledge and engage them, and then give them the tools and the sort of learning curriculum to advance and find good solutions to all of these issues. Next slide. We have a partnership with Thurgood Marshall. It's a great partnership. We talk all the time about advocacy for various programs and how we can bring these schools into some of these core areas that are the priorities for the labs. Next slide. For the small businesses out there, we have a mentor protege program. Our last mentor protege was Fayetteville State. They were successful in getting on the GSA schedule. So they have 2 GS scheduling contracts, and they have an opportunity. They're located in Fayetteville, North Carolina, as many of you know, next to Fort Bragg, and they want to provide these services for Fort Bragg. So we coach them up on how to write a competitive proposal, how to price your people, and all of those sort of very intricate details you need to get on the GSA schedule, and they were successful. It's a pretty big deal for them. We've also worked with Fayetteville State on some new curriculum around fraud informatics. So this is a new program there. We've sort of partnered them up with Penn State, which is a part of our larger consortium to look at cybersecurity, misinformation, disinformation, and those things. So when we talk about mentoring on our aspect as a prime contractor to DOE, we talk mainly about helping you build your contracting infrastructure. You know, what are the position descriptions you need to have a vibrant, successful, competitive contracting office, and really help you out with those type of aspects. Next slide. We've also created some learning modules for professional development. We're actually working closely with NASA to develop sort of these professional development type enrichment experiences. So it's not just your research technical experience. You get sort of that wraparound service of learning how to communicate better, which is a hierarchy skill that students and faculty both need, learning how to do really good scientific writing, presentations, posters, resume, mentoring, all of these things that you wouldn't get in your 4-year curriculum at your college. So we really try to enhance your experience and grow you as a professional. Next slide. And those are some of the things we hope to do and develop within our students and our faculty. Confidence, professional identity. We really want our students to identify with these opportunities, especially our first generation students, or TMCF calls it first time corporate students. How do you identify with the journey? How do you identify with this new culture? How do you identify with the position? And you only do that through sort of enriching the experience with all of those modules I showed you before. Next slide. All right, so we're at the end. I thank you for your time. There's so much more I can talk to you about, but here's my information. If you want to reach out, just send me an email. And with that, I will pass it back to Christy. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. That was fantastic, of course. Very detailed, lots of really good information. I wrote down some notes here that not only were you providing resources and direction, but I love the technical assistance that you provide. And I love that you highlighted contracting opportunities for the minority serving institutions. I don't know that enough of them know that they can create another income stream for their schools through contracting with the government. So that was a really good highlight. And now we'll go to Damon, who will have even additional great information to share. So I'll pass it on, Roy, if you would highlight Damon.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Damon House. I work for Microsoft. I do a lot around Microsoft. You're seeing my screen currently, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I manage solutions and strategy for healthcare and education in Microsoft's Worldwide Services division. I know that's a lot. But basically, when it comes to healthcare and us going out of the field, some of the things that I personally manage are solutions around vaccine registration and administration. It's a pretty hot topic these days. One of the bots that my team was able to develop was actually sold into organizations like CDC and TSA to be able to help residents understand how COVID-19 was impacting them. So I have a personal passion around healthcare. And so that's why Desmond, one of the things that he and I have been working on is around that Minority Health Information Exchange. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But also when it comes to education, so my father went to Tennessee State University, and then he got his MBA from then Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University. I graduated from Georgetown University, but I definitely realized that I need to do a better job of ensuring that our communities of color are receiving the same opportunities, the same resources that some of their PWI counterparts are. So I have made it my mission and my passion while here at Microsoft to go through the warehouses and the closets and the dumpsters and find all of the programs that we have and see how we can bring those to bear for our universities, for our students, and as well K through 12 and beyond. So I know that there were some comments in the chat window earlier on about how we need to deepen the pipeline for students by reaching down into K through 12 and introducing them to some of these STEM opportunities. So when we talk about some of the things around communities of color, education, absolutely, and we want to look at healthcare and nutrition. We want to look at economic development. Those are three of the things that Desmond talked about, and we definitely want to highlight those as opportunities for research, for innovation. There are others. There's criminal justice reform, voting rights, affordable housing, and then sure, more at a social level, accessibility, LGBTQ plus, and then we also have things like religion. Innovation can be a part of our daily lives every single day, but it is a muscle, and it's a muscle that needs to be developed, needs to be trained, and it needs to be used regularly. And so those are some of the things that we've been looking at and how our programs from Microsoft can be instrumental in helping to do that. As we look at our As we look at our communities in action, we definitely want to look at our HBCUs and our MSIs. But I will talk about how we can look at our K through 12 schools and how we can build that deeper pipeline. We also have our community-based programs, global skilling initiatives, as an example. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But once COVID hit, Microsoft with LinkedIn that we own, we put out free global skilling programs around training some of those service workers who were the first and hardest hit in the economic downturn so that they could learn digital skills and then hopefully get new jobs. So we can talk a little bit more about some of those programs, but then we also have to talk about Smart City. Our cities are clearly not just tall buildings, but our cities are also our communities, our suburbs, our exurbs, and even extending out into rural. How can we make them smarter? And one of the crazy companies that I'm working with right now is taking the sensors on streets and highways, and some of you drive. There might even be one or two of you who are young and in college and too young to drive. And but when you're on those roads, those highways, and you have those reflectors that are in the road, some of them are white, some of them are blue, depending on the different types of highway, they are digitally connecting those so that now we can start looking at traffic conditions, weather conditions, a lot of different types of things. And that is a minority-owned business that we are happy to support and help them to extend and expand their capabilities. But we're also encouraging them to reach back into our universities to get new students who could potentially be employees. So we really see it as a full wraparound opportunity for us to engage when it comes to STEM. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our programs, but I want to set them up like this. We feel it is important for us to engage in our universities and with our students. And so to do that, we want to look at the academic side. We want to look at the technology, and we want to bolster that in and around the educational process. But we also need to have interaction. And so engagement is fine, but now interacting with students, with universities, helping with different entrepreneurship programs, innovation competitions, hackathons, those are where we start to see some of the traction. And then lastly, when we look at development, that's the research and development. There is a big research team in Microsoft, and they develop things that never hit the street as commercial products. They're just thought ideas, but some of them do. One of the programs I'm actually working with is they take 3D scans of a tumor inside your body, and then they digitize it so that they can have better visualization of their surgical field. For example, Is there a vein or an artery that goes through that tumor? Where is it, and how can we cut around it so we don't further injure the patient? So R&D is critical, and Desmond talked eloquently about the benefits of research. So I won't even try to jump into his lane on that. I will let him have that. But we do need to encourage more research, and we are interested in partnering with universities and with students who have innovative programs and how we can advance that research. But when we look at some of those programs, we look at it in a three horizon. The engagement is, what can we do immediately? How can we set the foundation for these opportunities? Then we extend. How can we have that interaction? And that's regional events. That is entrepreneurship programs. And a partner that I'm working with here at Microsoft is one of the ambassadors for our Microsoft for Startups program. But then also that development. So how can we look at research centers of excellence? And that's part of what Desmond spoke about when he talked about the Minority Health Information Exchange and the AI Center of Excellence for Social Impact. Those are just some of the things that we're looking at in those programs where we want to encourage students to see technology, but we want them to see it through the lens of themselves. Find yourself in the technology, and then it's not work anymore. Then it's passion around something that is important to you. So when we look at that Center of Excellence for Social Impact, that was a conversation that we were having with NASA, and they said, we've got to figure out AI on going back to the moon. And we said, Desmond and I said, yeah, that's cool, but not every student is going to see that program and want to get involved in it. But if we can take that program, and I realize that the sun is coming in. I almost got it. It's that time of day. There we go. Okay. So we realize that if students are looking at that, they're not going to find themselves in the AI. So what can we do? Well, if we could digitize photos and songs and attendance records and marches and arrest records of our parents and our grandparents who were part of the civil rights movement. What if a student could type in their mother's name and they could see, hey, my mother was a member of this NAACP chapter. My mother participated in this sit-in. My mother signed this petition. These are the opportunities that allow us to then find ourselves in them. And then we're not working on some project that is antiseptic and sterile, but now we're working on a rich tapestry of our own history and how that can impact our lives and impact those people coming behind us. So when we look at the how these kind of tie together, the HBCUs, the community, and the smart city, we have to look at that they're not just one another and they're separate, but they do intersect together. And so by that intersection, it allows us different opportunities to engage. Let me give you some examples. So when we talk about the HBCUs and MSIs and the universities and institutions, we definitely want to talk about their academic programs. And Desmond and I spend a lot of time talking about how can we bolster academic programs at universities. It's easy to say that we just want to do a research program. That's great. And they can get contracts. That's fine. But we need to make sure that there's a correlation tied back to that around curriculum and development and advancement. We speak often around when we look at R&D development centers and we're developing this new technology, that curriculum then does it just stay at that school, or can it be expanded and shared with other universities? When we talk about innovation hubs, and this is a program that Microsoft is launching, HUB stands for historically underrepresented businesses. So now we can start talking about, well, those advancements and those innovations were great, but now how can we get them out into the market? How can we allow federal agencies like the Department of Energy, corporate entities like Microsoft, and everybody in between to share some of our trademarks, our patents, our copyrights with universities so that now they have access to better information and they don't have to feel like they recreate the wheel. But also we want to help them if they come up with a new patent. How can we help them to file that patent, and then how can they license it and gain revenue from that? So we think that that's a fantastic opportunity in leveraging the power of universities. when we look at the community-based programs, we want to take a look at what are some of the programs that currently exist, and that's within Microsoft, but that's also programs that may exist at a municipal level, maybe exist with a foundation or with a nonprofit. And so how can we take those programs and give them the gasoline that they need to really go, but also how can we then help them to develop new programs that may positively benefit the community, may benefit students, may benefit in a number of different ways. And we also want to take a look at those programs and those events locally in and around where we live. And so the history of Oak Ridge is a fantastic example of that. That was something that came together around a research program, and they said, shh, don't tell anybody. That was very local, but the impact of that could be national. So now are we looking at opportunities to take what was learned there and then share it out? And so other national laboratories have now come into existence. So we definitely want to look at tying in our communities, yes, but also with our partners so that we can really visualize the best of what can be possible. And then we also take a look at smart city. A public-private partnership model is one of the critical things that we want to look at. It's easy to help a city. It's easy to look at the federal agencies or the state agencies. But if they try to do it by themselves, they'll typically fall short because that's just not their lane. When we look at the corporate partners, well, that's a Microsoft, that could be Boeing, that could be John Deere, that could be some of the other corporations. We often have the technology capability. And so Desmond and I have come together on several partnerships that allow us to say, ORAU is the prime utilizing Microsoft technology. How can we then go and help with COVID testing on HBCU campuses? How can we look at centers of excellence and other opportunities that are out there? So these are a number of the ways that we try to be impactful in the development, in the innovation, in the entrepreneurship. Now, Desmond talked about healthcare. So when we take a look at healthcare, that data repository, Desmond was talking, we were actually talking about how could we improve accreditation at HBCUs. And he happened to randomly mention, HBCUs, they've got a lot of this data and they just can't do anything about it. And I said, well, our accreditation, we have software that can help them with their accreditation. Well, that could be helpful. But I said, well, that could also do other things. And so we started talking about, well, they've got all these forms, and these forms sit in warehouses and storage closets, and nobody does anything with them. They just keep them. Well, what if we were to digitize them? And so, as I talked about with the Center for Social Impact, there is an opportunity for us to take that data, share that data across the different records, longitudinally, historically. We can also tie that data in with food access and sustainability in our markets, so we can see what was the prevalence of diabetes, what is our hypertension, and how have policy changes in our communities impacted health with the advent of brownfields and other things that may lead to negative or detrimental comorbidities in our healthcare. So I could talk at length about that, but I won't because time is short. But when we talk about these industry data repositories, Desmond and I have been looking at agriculture. Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't look at energy, and also aviation, aerospace, and some of the other industries. So there are a lot of ways that we can capture that data, but then look at the intersectionality of that data across those industries. So Microsoft worldwide, some even accuse us of global domination. Yes, I'm looking at you, Dr. Stubbs. We do help to support education across our HBCUs, MSIs, and traditional colleges and universities in the U.S. We also want to look at helping in South America. We actually started a program called For Africa, where we look at innovation and entrepreneurship on the continent of Africa. But we also have education programs in and around different geographic areas in Europe and in Asia as well. And now the eye chart. And of course, I'm not going to read this out to everyone. I will, if I can get this. Okay. this is where I definitely want to talk at length about what it is that we can do as we broaden the pipeline. You can see this is just a small subsection of some of the programs that we have, and I'm happy to share this presentation out with you afterwards so you can really take time to digest it, so you don't have to read and memorize everything now. But we want to look at STEM programs that introduce different industry and technologies into K through 12 so that students can understand what is available. Too often we'll see that there are students who didn't learn about chemistry until they got to college because their school may have been underfunded and didn't have a chemistry program, may not have learned about drones, may not have learned about some of these different opportunities. But that also goes to they may not have learned how to innovate. They may not have learned about entrepreneurship. And so we want to make sure that we take programs like these and we make them available through our universities, through our partners like ORISE and ORAU, through the Department of Energy more broadly. One of the programs that we have is startups, and we look at how can we drive a startup motion. Well, we've taken it a step further and started saying, well, how can we look at startups around particular industries? So we are working together with a young lady here at Microsoft who's creating a green energy startup and sustainability program. Now, if we kind of parallel that to what's going on right now in Texas. And I could say my partner, who I work very closely with, lives in Dallas, and he has rolling blackouts because of their energy grid. So now let's take this as an opportunity to then look at our universities and say, hey, what can we do to strengthen our energy grid? As an example, Virginia Tech did a lot of work and research around solar cells. They developed a lot of patents. Those patents are now IP that they license out, and they take a couple of cents on every solar cell. Those are the types of programs that we need to create more of in our universities. We can rely on the Department of Energy. We can rely on NASA. We can rely on Microsoft to develop a lot of these technologies. But we've got to encourage our students and our faculty to be the engines that continue to drive this as well. And here's some more. Very quickly, I want to talk about the cycle of empowerment and the way that we see it. We really do look at our universities and we say, okay, there's a lot that we can do in and through our universities. So I've talked about some of the industry education and the training that we can do. Well, that leads to the community-based programs and allowing us to then extend that out to nonprofits, and then bringing those organizations together for research and R&D. And that's where RIU, ORISE come in. We developed innovation hubs and centers, and these are not necessarily at one school. These could be across different universities. So as an example, a drone program, Desmond's working with the Florida Institute of Technology, and they have a fantastic drone program. Well, it turns out Florida A&M does as well. And so if we can bring them together, now those two schools that are geographically near each other, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But it also turns out that Microsoft is already working with SMU, the University of Texas at Dallas, and Paul Quinn on their own drone program. So now if we could take those two programs and sort of link them together across Florida and Texas, it now allows us to extend the number of people working on these technologies. And so that's some of what we want to look at. That smart city engagements allows us then to tie it into real world impact. One of our companies is actually looking at how drones can be used for prescription pharmaceuticals to be delivered to people's homes. It's a minority-owned business that's gotten some investment through Microsoft and is now setting up a public and private relationship in their city. I'm not at liberty to say where, but they're doing a number of really great things across many states here in the U.S. But when we take a look at this model and we extend this model, we now can see that when we fold in entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship needs to start in college and university. It could even start in K through 12. There are plenty of students who have fantastic ideas that need to be supported. Ideas that if they just had a little technological support, a mentor, a university that says, hey, you know what, that's a pretty good idea. You know, why don't you have access to our resources? There are ways that we can support this. And so when we look at that social entrepreneurship around innovation, wouldn't it be great if a high school student could come up with an idea through a few hackathons, drive that idea through development cycles, get into college and continue working on it? Not every student needs to come and work for Microsoft. There, I said it. I'll say it again. We're not necessarily trying to hire everyone, but we do want to empower everyone to achieve their best. And so if we can help that student to set up and have that capability, then that's a fantastic opportunity. We believe in changing the innovation and entrepreneurship culture in our communities. And this is just a quick slide that shows some of the different programs that we have been working on and we've successfully launched. We have hackathons. Every July, Microsoft hosts the world's largest private hackathon. We encourage all of our employees to stop for what they're doing for a week and just pick an idea and just hack on it and come up with something creative. And this year we invited a number of different universities, HBCUs, we got 8, to come together and just specifically come up with their own ideas. Dr. Stubbs was a judge, one of the judges that we had, and we had several judges from NASA and from USDA. But there are other programs that we can have. The Imagine Cup is an 18-year global innovation program that had never been tailored to minority-serving institutions. So we saw this as a fantastic opportunity to reach out to those schools and invite their students to participate. We're working on e-gaming. We own a small division called Xbox. Some of you may have heard of it. And especially around the pandemic, gaming has become one of the most popular things to do in your home. But why shouldn't gaming be an educational opportunity? We don't just want kids who can code and come in and write lines of code for us. We want to promote students who can start their own businesses, who can start their own tournaments, who can be the next professional athlete, gaming athlete. You know, when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing, but now it is. There are professional e-athletes that make millions of dollars a year. But now how can we also tie in fashion and e-commerce around gaming? How can we develop different competitions for students to utilize, say, Minecraft to see who can come up with the best render of their own school or a green school? What could that potentially look like? We're also looking at the industry programs that I mentioned, the Innovation Hub, the IP management platform. I touched on this briefly, but if IP could be shared and leveraged and accessed, what more could we do if we had access and we knew it was there? And then we're also looking at an impact series. We want to bring together some of the best minds in the industry around education, around corporate industry, technology, et cetera, and then talk about what's top of mind. And this was an idea that really came to us and really gained a lot of strength around the passing of George Floyd. A lot of people had some very interesting things to say. It's very interesting to hear how that tied into technology and how that tied into civil rights. So we are going to start an impact series where we can take those conversations, capture them, and make them available, very similar to TED Talks. So I just want to take a final moment to say that there is tremendous opportunity around us every day. Each of your schools, your students, your faculty are doing tremendous things, and they need to be celebrated, but they need to be empowered and encouraged as well. So we are working as hard as we can, as quickly as we can, to drive more entrepreneurship and innovation opportunities. Again, we've got to reach down to our K through 12 and introduce them to these concepts sooner so that they have more runway to get started. And then, yes, I would love to hire students coming out of school into Microsoft. We're not just about STEM. We need accountants. We need business managers. We need people who work in our cafeterias. Our cafeterias actually set up a green hydroponics lab that took fish in one aquarium, that took food in another, and created an entirely self-sufficient biosphere. these are the types of ideas that we need in Microsoft and we need in ORAU, ORISE. And so we hope that you'll at least consider getting on board with innovation and entrepreneurship and then seeing how we might be able to accelerate that path forward for you. So thank you. And I'm sorry about the sun.
Thank you so much, Damon. That was really great opportunities. I love your last slide, focusing on proximity, hope, action, really good, powerful terms. Now we'll just go to our audience and answer any questions. It's 2:20, so we have about 30-40 minutes for Q&A. So Roy, if you'll facilitate releasing people to ask questions as they notify you, that would be great.
Of course. If you would like to ask a question, you can ask a question verbally through your computer. Please go ahead and click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. In doing so, you will indicate that you wish to ask a question. When you are unmuted, you will hear a notification at that time. Please then state your name and question. Alternatively, you can submit your question via the chat. Please select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the box provided, and send.
And Roy, I think there are currently some questions in the chat if you would facilitate that.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, how is the HBCU or MEI faculty summer research program similar to the DOE visiting faculty program?
Yeah, so it's similar in that it works, the mechanics are similar, where we're matching a faculty member from the university system with a DOE scientist. So that's similar. They co-create a project and they sort of plot out a schedule where that professor would leave the campus and conduct the research at the DOE facility. This program is it runs similar, the mechanics is similar, it's just geared to MSI. So it's really focused on the minority serving institutions. So the mechanics run the same. The other program, the DOE faculty program, is a federal program. The HBCU is a laboratory program paid for by the contractor. So that's, that's sort of that federal inside terms, but you don't necessarily have to be a U.S. citizen to be a part of the HBCU MEI program.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. I'm currently an applicant to the MLEFP. I'm hoping that they're still going to do some traveling by the time summer comes along. To Desmond, do you believe that this could still be a possibility for the summer?
Yeah, there hasn't been a decision made yet. As you know, everything that you're hearing on your 5 o'clock news is the things we deal with. Like we're getting the information at the same speed of you. So we're all of the programs I'm hearing for the summer, they're still sort of in the decision phase. We would love to have students in person and have travel, but that's really going to depend on COVID. I mean, COVID is going to really, determine all of those factors. And I think we'll know more as we get closer to the spring. But if there is a chance, we would definitely prefer to have that.
All right, moving on to our next question. The pipeline of students from high school into physics and chemistry has significantly decreased. Then it's this leaky pipeline when they matriculate into science. Need outreach to minority high school students about the opportunities that science can provide, not just biology and health sciences. These issues must be directed to high school students before they decide their major in college. And how can you help underrepresented and minorities expose and recruit students from high schools into physics and chemistry?
Yeah, I guess that question is for me, or it could be for Christy. Yeah, Christy, you need to join some of this fun. So yeah, we do know that, and over the years, much to my dismay, we've really decreased our investment into the K through 12 pipeline, and that there's some behind the scenes thing between what's the line of delineation between the Department of Education, that's pretty much responsible for that, and the Department of Energy, right? So and NSF. right? So you have all of these agencies that are fighting over a pot of dollars. I don't want to get too deep into that, but there's only so much the Department of Energy goes to that border before they have to sort of pull back into the pipeline. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we used to have a program way back when at Oak Ridge National Lab where they actually provided an extra salary stipend for each physics teacher that was hired in the East Tennessee area. That was a program that went on for a few years, and it actually attracted some really good, high-quality, credentialed physics teachers. And that's the real problem. We don't have enough credentialed physics teachers with physics degrees teaching physics. That's a hard nut to crack because the pipeline, as you mentioned, at the collegiate level is empty when it comes to, even going into physics education. That's again, a very shallow pool of highly sought after people who are very expensive, by the way, for a school to hire. So at the end of the day, it comes down to economics. The other thing comes down to creativity. So there are things everyone can do. Everybody's responsible for this issue. So the colleges are responsible. We are responsible to sort of be creative and come up with ideas. So if you have an idea, and this goes for everyone online, that you think, you've thought through, you have a white paper idea. You have folks on this call right now. I mean, feel free to send a white paper. I do it to Christy all the time. Send a white paper with some solutions. You now have faces, contacts, names. Send a white paper out unsolicited and say, hey, what do you think about this? I've been thinking about this. You never know. We typically send it off to someone who thinks about this area, who has some funding maybe, or who's sort of shaping some funding opportunities. I mean, I know NASA's invested in physics as well. So, if you have some ideas, don't leave it up to us. Go ahead and write a 2-pager, on how you think that would work and what the mechanics would look like and, what you think the support level would need to be. And I, if you send it to me, I'd definitely circulate it around my network. So.
And I'd like to add to what Desmond said. He's absolutely right. There is a line between what we can do with Department of Energy and where Department of Education comes into play. So the Department of Education is K through 12. Our programs are undergrad and graduate and above. And so, but for high school seniors where there is a bridge program to a college program, we can get involved with that. But there has to be something that high school senior is doing something with the college, or they're taking some college level course and program that they're involved in. That's an area where we can be supportive. But as far as keeping that line separate between Department of Education and Department of Energy or any other federal agency, Department of Education is K through 12. But I love what you said, Desmond, about the colleges being involved. They don't have that limitation. They certainly have programs where they reach out to high school students, and we're very grateful for that. Some of the national labs actually have some different programs as well. And then the science bowls are usually open to different grade levels. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for high school involvement. It's just not direct when it comes to our agency because of that separation between other agencies and the Department of Education. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question then. Can you discuss small business opportunities?
I'm guessing that's me, so I can take it. So Microsoft has, it's called Microsoft for Startups, and I'll put the link in the chat window. It is an organization within Microsoft that takes a look at making investments into businesses, and not necessarily minority owned, so it's all businesses. And saying, hey, you know what, as long as you're building some level of technology on our, utilizing some form of Microsoft technology, then we can support you. We can make investments in you. Microsoft for Startups is great for those organizations and entities that are already underway, so more as an accelerator rather than an incubator. We don't necessarily help you get started, and that's one of the things that I'm working on. I want to create an incubation cycle that we can work through. So if you have some customers, if you're making a little revenue, happy to talk to you and see how we can, what we can do to bring you in. Then as small businesses get a little more successful, after you've been around for maybe 1 or 2 years, you've hit, and I'm going to throw out numbers here, but if you hit a $3 million annual revenue, you've got a number of customers, well, we can take you to M12. M12 is Microsoft's VC arm. There are opportunities where it doesn't necessarily have to be those numbers at those thresholds. They may make exceptions, but they're going to want to see that everything is kind of ticked and tied before they're able to put some of those dollars in. Additionally, we have a lot of technology programs that can help to introduce entrepreneurs on some of the technology like Office. How to use Office for a small business, how to do vision boards, how to do those things. So we can help in a number of different ways. And so I'm putting I will put my email address in the chat window so that if you have specific questions, you can reach out and I can try and address them further.
All right, moving on to our next question. Is there any program for the HBCU faculty which can support funding for release time?
No, that's something that, hopefully, as this new administration gets started and looking at barriers to participation, it's very tough because the funding from Congress cannot be used to pay for release time. That's just a fundamental thing. I've been fighting this battle for many, many years. I think NSF can do it, but DOE, we cannot cover leave time. However, there are sabbatical programs at certain labs where your college, if it allows for you to take a sabbatical leave, those arrangements can be made. I've seen different models where, a faculty member can get a co-appointment at a lab. And all these things can be possible through relationships. So I would start at relationships first, because I don't know what all the art of the possible can be until you start talking to people and talking to more people to understand. But there's no program right now in place to pay for leave time. But what I would encourage you to do is, if you've identified a particular research area and a researcher you'd like to connect to, is to begin to have those conversations first, right? Once you become sort of co-collaborators, co-PIs, and you start to look for opportunities within the DOE system, research opportunities or even outside of the DOE system, you can always do that. Then, folks like Christy, myself, and others can come in and see, like, what can we do if those relationships are in place? It's hard to start with just an individual, right? But if you have something that's going against some momentum, where you've already gotten with some person within the DOE system, and now you're like, okay, we did this, we came together, we have a plan, we have a proposal, we have an abstract. How can you help us? It's much easier for us than to sort of push, the limits or the boundaries around that, because that's a reciprocal value to all of us on the call, even for Microsoft, to try to help, versus sort of an individual PI who have to all these other stages you have to go through before we could say, okay, it was a valuable use of dollars to pay for that leave time. Anyway, so that's my response.
Thank you, David.
All right, moving on to our next question. Does this program include HBCU 2-year institutions?
Well, I don't know which program you're referring to. So if you're an HBCU, you qualify for the HBCU program. You just have to be doing research. So a lot of the 2 years, and it's competitive. So I don't know if I mentioned that. So if you apply, it doesn't mean that you're going to be accepted. Remember that it depends on the quality of your proposal. So you're proposing to do research at the lab in that program. And we always encourage that if you write the proposal by yourself without contacting a PI, there will be a disconnect between your interests and a research group. So you probably want to get with that PI for a few months before you even propose together. So your language is in sync with the language of that, researcher at the lab. And it just looks better and becomes more competitive, where we don't have to go on our side and shop around your abstract and your proposal to various research groups, and it's out of phase or alignment with where they want to go with their research or their needs, right? So you want to grow those together in a collaborative way with the researcher. But if you're a 2-year and you have research and the research fits the laboratory, again, if you go to the laboratory, look at the research priorities, look at the instrumentation. So you have to show that, hey, if I have access to Oak Ridge National Lab and I get some time because I have this big problem with big data and I get a little bit of time on one of your supercomputers, maybe not, Jaguar, maybe not the big ones, just one of your supercomputers, just to crunch some numbers, do some calculation. And here's my proposal. Here's some of the publications I'm going to target. Here's some of the grants I'm going to target. That makes you competitive. But again, this is if you're a faculty member and you're on this call, find somebody at the lab and start building that relationship. Again, it makes it so much easier. There are programs on the books, and then there's programs that are just, that come about just through force of relationship or momentum that just compels, funders to say, I like what you guys going on there. That's something we don't have that we need to figure out.
All right, moving on to our next question. It's a little bit of a long one. Can investments be made in intensive first-year grad and undergrad programs to bolster exposure for URM? The military academies often takes on students who come from backgrounds that are subpar compared to many other high school students. They use prep schools to shore up the students' backgrounds to ensure that students can progress. Could a similar model be used to pull up students who would want to go into STEM but have poor backgrounds? And can we support more students who just need more exposure?
I don't know if Desmond or Damon have any projects, but I think that's a wonderful proposal. One of the things you mentioned, Desmond, were grants. And I don't know how many people are familiar with grants.gov, but there are so many agencies who are looking for proposals just like that or projects like that, things that would shore up students and make them more competitive, build their capacity to be able to perform at higher levels and, and pay for fund that project to help those students, minority or otherwise. So Damon or Desmond, I don't know if you're aware of any projects that are currently in place, but that certainly sounds like a proposal that would be around a grant.
Yeah, so what this person just proposed is sort of like a bridge program, right? So for research, the laboratories are highly intensive, competitive research arenas, right? So there are kids across the spectrum that need more help than other kids. The lab may not be the thing you bridge to, right? If they're starting from behind, they have to catch up a little bit. And yes, the country needs to invest in that personally. I say that personally, not representing DOE or anybody. But the bridge to the lab is highly intensive research. First of all, you're going to have an interest in doing research. So if you're not interested in getting good grades in school or you're lagging, you got to get that right first. And then there's another giant leap into doing research around material science for the national lab. It may not be the right fit. I'm just saying that. I'm not trying to downgrade anyone. It just may not be the right fit. The more realistic fit is to have sort of those engagement programs, and those exist. It depends on where you live. If there's a laboratory where you live, there are programs to get folks in there to see the science, touch the science, and maybe a day immersion in the science. There are little steps to get there. Programmatically, that's an NSF type idea of sort of funding those bridges to college or to remediation. That's another DOE type, Department of Education type idea that would be interested in that. You just got to understand that the Department of Energy is not just sort of teaching the basics of energy. That's important. Energy literacy is important. We're trying to produce electricity, right? The scale is huge. And so there's a different set of minority kids and minority schools that are more attenuated to these opportunities than others. Not saying that they can't be, but there's other programs that can grow them towards that direction.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Desmond. I mean, stepping stones, I think is what you're saying. Yeah.
And I could say that while we do have programs that could be used in support of those types of things, our programs are not necessarily tied into the funding capabilities around those students. So now we have apprenticeships, we do have internships. They are competitive, but we do take into account, for example, our LEAP apprenticeship program is a program around minority and women, minority students and women who are looking to do things like program project management, coding and development. So it may not necessarily be that research type of program. So that's where we might hook on to a university if they did have interest in doing something like that, to say, okay, well, maybe we could work together with you. We could bring some of the technology, the skills, the educational components of that if you can help us to identify some of the students who might be interested. So there are potentially some things in there, but if you're talking more from that pure research perspective, then that's probably going to be more Desmond.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. A question for Desmond. Do you have advice for students who struggle academically or who are not as academically inclined as some of their respective peers to stand out and pursue these opportunities presented here and further themselves with research? Desmond, you're muted.
Sorry. I knew that was going to happen. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, so if your end goal is to enter research, right, and you struggle academically, I think wherever you are, if you're at a college or, I don't know if we have pre-college people here, you have to get as much out of the experience you're having and show promise there. I think what students do and what faculty do, it's like everybody dreams big. And then, again, it's this giant leap of your aspirations and what you want to do, but you're not maximizing what you can do where you are. Like if you're a faculty member at a 2-year, college HBCU, you have to show promise of doing research there, and you can publish, may not be peer-reviewed journal, but you can publish your work and sort of build those credentials up and stack those together. So again, you have a coherent story of a narrative that with just a little sort of incentive, you can do a whole lot more, but you have to show the promise. So if you're a student and you're struggling, there are resources wherever you are, on every college campus, in every high school. You have to show that you went to see a guidance counselor, you went to see your advisor, you understood what the courses were you need to take or retake, or what, sort of the prerequisites you needed to move on. But you have to maximize your experience and show that promise. And when we're looking at candidates for these opportunities, even if your GPA is not 4.0, in fact, it's been my experience, there's some bias in the system against people who GPAs are 4.0, but even if your GPA is not, where it needs to be, but you're showing promise and you can articulate, the type of research you want to engage in and why, I think people value that. We always ask for essays as part of our applications because of that. We just want to see where you are and see if because, I always say this, I got this from my former mentor, who, we've sort of separated over the years, but I always like hearing her voice in my ear, where she said, I prefer someone with low skill and high will over someone with high skill and very low will, right? Meaning, someone who's motivated, but you just can't say you're motivated in an interview. You sort of have to show the paper trail of where you try to access any resource that's free, and there's so much that's free across the DOE spectrum. You go to any website, all of the laboratories has access to free resources. There are free courses you can take. You have to show that. You have to do that. I mean, the onus is not on us to just see the promise because you said there is, right? The onus on you is sort of to express that, and then we see it and it's recognized, and the GPA gets thrown out the door because we see the student and the person you are.
Thank you, Desmond. Roy, we'll take a couple more questions. I want to make sure we end on time.
All right, our next question is for Mr. House. Can you display the link to the Microsoft Biz program?
I did. I put it in the chat window. It's startups.microsoft.com. There's also a link in there for our social entrepreneurship program, where universities can set up entrepreneurship programs, and then they can get additional support for the businesses that start under that innovation program. That was a quick answer. I would like to go back to that last question, and I will say this. If your hustle is strong enough, even though you may not be the most academically gifted, I have seen situations where entrepreneurs who wanted to be that technologist, they wanted to be that industry person, and then they just weren't there. But they got involved and then found a partner and were still able to get that work done through starting their own business. You'd be surprised the level of research that should go into starting your own business. So it is always another path forward. If your grades aren't good enough for one of these snooty organizations to take you, your hustle can get you in a whole lot of other doors. So please, please, please keep fighting, keep trying. We want to see you successful. And yes, Desmond, I called you snooty.
I won't hold that against you.
Roy, any more?
All right. Just very quickly, Damon, can we confirm that the link was sent to everybody in the chat? I don't believe it was sent properly.
Oh, okay. So I will go ahead and put those in correctly. I see. Okay. I just want to say, I'm used to Microsoft Teams. Have I said that yet? Oh, no. I will go ahead and send it out to everybody right now. My apologies.
All right, and one last time then, if you do have a question, you can submit it via the chat to all panelists, or you can click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom platform to ask your question verbally.
No more questions in the chat, Roy?
And there are no further questions.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and start to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience who attended. This is a series of information sessions. I'm trying to have something every month. Next month, we will have Dartmouth presenting minority opportunities through their school. Thank you, Desmond and Damon, for presenting on Microsoft and ORISE. We hope to keep having these resources for our minority students, our minority faculty, our minority serving institutions, building partnerships, sharing information, and just trying to build connections. We don't want the pandemic to stop us, so we're just trying to find a way around the barriers so we can keep things moving forward. So thank you, everyone who joined today, and thank you, Vince and Ann. I know you've gone off to other meetings. Oh, there's Vince. Thank you for supporting this effort, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.